Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Film Academy Day at the BFI London Film Festival. My name is Alex, and I'm the Film Academy Festival and Events producer. And our panel discussion today is inspired by two projects in the LFF Expanded installment. So that's Eldfell and To Miss the Ending. And we'll be talking about the creators. We'll be talking to the creators of these projects in our discussion today. The discussion will be hosted by Elaine Wong. Elaine is the BFI London Film Festival Shorts programmer, and she focuses her work on digital content across numerous formats and technologies, including VR. So I'll be introducing Elaine shortly, but just before I hand over to her, I just wanted to give you a few housekeeping tips. First of all, I wanted to introduce my team. We have my colleague Noel working in the chat box, managing the chat box. So if you have any questions for us, BFI Film Academy questions, general BFI questions, LFF questions, or future film festival questions, our festival is coming up in February, then do ask Noel in the chat box and he'll answer them for you. And please do introduce yourselves in the chat box. It would be great to know who you are, especially if you're one of the 10 lucky people who got to experience the LFF Expanded exhibition in the BFI South Bank today. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to hear what you thought of the exhibition, and specifically about these two projects that we'll be talking about today. So do say hi. And then my colleague Winnie is managing the Q&A box. So for any questions that you have for our panelists or for Elaine, please pop them in the Q&A box. And you can start doing that now, and we'll devote the last 15 minutes of the session to your questions. I would like to thank our partners, the Rubin Foundation, who support all BFI education events, our funding contributors, Old Possum's Practical Trust, and Lacey, who are our competition partner today. And we got some feedback from you guys after our last few events that you would like more opportunities to network with each other. And until we can safely welcome all of you to BFI South Bank for some drinks in the Blue Room, we've started a Facebook networking group. So feel free to join it and interact with each other, share your profiles, portfolios, contact details. I think Noel will post the link to the group in the chat box shortly, so do join. And then as the very final thing, I wanted to let you know that the session today is being recorded, and we'll post the recording on the BFI YouTube channel after the festival. And now I'll hand over to Elaine. Enjoy the session.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, everyone. My name is Elaine Wong, and as Alex said, I work on the LFF Shorts programming team. Welcome to the session on crafting immersive narratives and transforming the storytelling experience. As I'm sure you already know, this year for the LFF, this is the first year that they've hosted what they're calling the BFI Expanded section, which is works that work with new technologies and pioneer new forms of storytelling. Within that, they've created a virtual exhibition known as The Expanse, which is a virtual exhibition which houses all the VR and interactive works. If you don't have a VR headset at home, it is available at BFI South Bank if you're able to. Then you can book a ticket and see the experiences there. Today, I'm joined by creators from two of the experiences within The Expanse. The first is Alyssa T. Mello. So I'm going to introduce Alyssa now. Alyssa was born and raised in Maui, Hawaii, before studying film and cinematography at university in the USA, the Czech Republic, and most recently the UK, where she graduated with an MA in Directing and Producing for Science and Natural History at the National Film and Television School, the NFTS. Alongside her pursuits in film, she's developed an interest in video games and interactive media as a means of storytelling, and is currently working on AR, VR, and 360 documentary projects using these tools. Alyssa seeks to tell important stories in unexpected ways, engaging the curiosity and compassion of her audiences through moments of revelation and designing for innovative technologies. So welcome, Alyssa. My next two, and they are in the same location, is Anna West and David Callanan. Anna West is a co-artistic director of I Don't Love You Anymore, a digital arts and performance company based in the north of England. Anna's a writer, performer, and director. She's worked with internationally renowned artists, including writer and director Tim Etchells and violinist Aisha Orzabeh. Anna wrote and co-directed To Miss the Ending, which is premiering this year at the LFF. She was a finalist for the Oxford Samuel Beckett Theatre Trust Award, as enjoyed artist residencies at Pact, Sverlin and Lancaster Arts. Anna has an MA in creative writing and a first-class BA from Lancaster University in creative arts. David is co-director of I Don't Love You Anymore, a digital art and performance company based in the north of England. He has worked within digital art and performance for 5 years and worked with some award-winning companies and venues, including 59 Productions, Imitating the Dog, Myth in Manchester, Circus du Soleil, and the West End. David produced and co-directed To Miss the Ending, which is premiering at LFF this year. He was a finalist of the Oxford Samuel Beckett Award Theatre Trust and has enjoyed residencies with Pact, Sverlin and Lancaster Arts. David also has a first-class BA from Lancaster University in Theatre Studies. So if you'd now like to welcome Alyssa, David and Anna. You can turn on your cameras now to join me. Hello there.
Hi.
And Anna and David, you are in the same place. This is not an illusion. You really are there physically.
Yeah. And don't worry, we're allowed to be in the same place.
Yeah.
We've lived together this whole time. So
Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to first of all just start by if you guys could talk just a little bit about your own experiences, kind of bearing in mind that I think hopefully some of these people watching at home have seen them, but if they haven't seen them, kind of just try to summarize what the experience is, and just try to describe VR visually, even if you can't see it. So I'll start with you, Alyssa.
So my experience is called Eldfell. It's based off of a series of interviews I did in Iceland, in a community that lives on a small island in the south. And in the 70s, there was a sudden eruption in the middle of the night, and the island essentially cracked in half, and people had to evacuate. And there's these amazing stories where within just a few hours, the island was completely evacuated, and there were no casualties. And then over the next kind of series of months, they had to kind of battle this volcano. And when I say battle, I mean it had like hoses spraying at water and all sorts of different kind of really ingenious solutions. And I found this story so fascinating, and especially because of the relationship between the people in the land and the people in nature, and then this whole kind of combination between that, and the fact that people could still remember it. So I went and I interviewed a few of the people who were there that night and what they remembered and what their personal stories were, and kind of took those memories and those stories and used VR to kind of put you in that mind and kind of illustrate what they were describing in a way that wasn't necessarily that communicated all the factual things, but also communicated just the experience of what they remembered, because some were 4 or 5 years old, and what would a volcano eruption look like to you if you were there. So in a nutshell.
Great. Like if we now hear a little bit about To Miss the Ending.
Yeah, sure.
So To Miss the Ending is based on a play that we made with a larger collective back in 2016, and it kind of presents an imagined future where people have uploaded their consciousness to a database or a machine in order to escape their current reality, and that reality we imagine is like 50 years from now. Well, that's what we imagined, but it's become a bit more present than that. Since writing it, there's a lot of things that have just happened that happened quicker than we thought they would.
I hope they would.
Yeah, so in the VR space, we kind of present a pixelated landscape of these cities that these people remember being in before they uploaded. And
the story and the experience is kind of told through individual kind of encapsulated memories. So each memory has a structure or an element of visual attached to it. And so through hearing these individual memories of people, you also we world build, in that you find out more about the world they lived in, but also the world literally builds around you. Of their parks build, and the apartment block they used to live in builds, and the library they used to visit builds. And so through these individual building blocks of memory and of space, you learn about their world, and eventually that world starts to collapse. and the buildings fall down and you're left in kind of darkness. And the way we imagine it, I think whatever you take from that event is totally fine, but the logic behind us making it in that way is that the server or the data center you're inside of is dying and breaking, and all of these people's memories are being deleted or miscommunicated or erased in some way. And then at the very end of the experience, you're left with this sea of labeled boxes, and each of those boxes is labeled with a memory that's, we think, too large to encapsulate in an iconic visual. So, for instance, a box might be labeled every cup of tea you drank, or a box might be labeled everyone you ever loved, or a box might be labeled all the embarrassment you felt. And so, that's how the experience ends, with this kind of swathe of unimaginable kind of memories and experiences. Great.
If I start now the questions, and Alyssa, obviously in your bio you mentioned that you were studying at the NFTS. Could you start by just telling us what you were studying there and kind of your experiences of film school, and then how you came to make a creative VR experience while at film school?
Yeah, for sure. So I was actually studying in the master's program at NFTS for directing and producing for science and nature documentary. So much more David Attenborough, Blue Planet, those kind of things, which is telling stories about science and nature, and especially those kind of important stories, is really kind of dear to my heart. But I also found the opportunity at being at film school to meet people from other departments, especially the games department, and getting to play with different kind of technologies and just having that opportunity. So I really fell in love with interactive media and the idea that you can kind of participate with the stories as they're being told, or even discover it for yourself, because that kind of engagement is always what we're looking for, I think, in media making. And so I did my first project was actually a 360 documentary, just pure video, that I filmed in Hawaii about it's kind of a zombie horror film. There was a documentary about this tree fungus that was unfortunately wiping out a lot of this really kind of important native tree that also is really kind of bound with the volcano goddess. There's a lot, just going back, there's a lot of volcanoes in my work, accidentally. And then my graduate project, I took the next step, and I completely developed in the Unity Games Engine and combined VR and 360 filming and all those kind of skills that I'd learned. And it was still science and nature documentary, even though the different techniques I was using something else, because really it's storytelling was what I found most important, and I'll use any medium that is suited for it. And I think VR was the correct medium for this story.
Do you think being at film school helped?
It did. It offered me quite a lot of opportunities, especially being an international student. So knowing that I wanted to move to the UK and kind of find a foothold in the industry here, going to film school really helped me establish a lot of kind of connections, and it helped me kind of make those next steps that otherwise would be a little bit challenging, more challenging maybe for an international student than it would be for someone here, just because of visas and jobs and all those different kind of things you have to do. But beyond that, really, the greatest thing I kind of learned at film school was through the people I met, including all my games knowledge, and not only students, but a great deal about the students, but also through the wonderful mentors and everything. So it was a really amazing time, and it was a very practical experience as well. So that was exactly what I was looking for. Yeah.
Great. If I now come to you, Anna and David, so you mentioned that you have kind of background in theatre. Do you want to talk us about kind of how you started out studying in theatre, and then how you came to be making your first VR project?
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, we met at university, and I was doing a more creative writing thing and theatre, and then you were studying theatre. So yeah, we met through that. So obviously that's pretty important. Then we met each other, and we kind of I guess shared a lot of passion in the same areas and stuff like that. So we just basically got to talking about making work together. So throughout our time at uni, we were like coming up with little ideas also outside of, you know, what we were doing as a course, and yeah, came to making stuff together.
Yeah, and I think
you were really interested in like the technical side of things as well, so kind of in a partnership way that helped.
Yeah, I think we as well, we always made performance work or live performance work that was heavily influenced by like the digital and was quite digitized often. So we made work that involved a lot of projection mapping. We made a piece where all of the audience took their phones out and you just got live stream content in the theatre from on the stage. So there was a kind of artificial barrier. We made a piece where we motion captured a fly in a box and kind of tracked that and live projected that onto stage. So there's always been an element of the digital's like been quite important in the work, and then the step into VR felt quite natural because I think from our experience of watching VR and from the way VR works as a medium, I think it sits somewhere between film and theatre. In a theatre, the camera isn't telling you where to look, so there's not those decisions being made on your behalf by a director or by a filmmaker, and in the same way in VR, you're making those own choices about your focus of attention. And so there's a lot of skills, there's a lot of techniques that we learned through making live work that just really sit well in VR in terms of directing attention, in terms of transitioning space, in terms of like lighting and sound and all that stuff. I suppose VR feels like kind of just the closest digital analog for theatre that you can get. So that's why we wanted to make a VR film, and then we made a VR film because we received some funding too.
Anna, you mentioned as well that your background is more kind of in creative writing. Can you talk to how that you had that journey from kind of starting off as a writer to move into kind of more theatre making and then VR making as well?
Well, the writing and the theatre making were always pretty linked for me because that's always what I was interested in, and also actually almost out of I was going to say convenience, but actually almost out of need, necessity for work to be seen and heard, because this is quite hard to let writing be heard all the time, and publishing has its own struggles. So it was actually just almost easier to step on stage and stuff like that, and I was doing open mics and things like that, so those things just naturally coalesce for me. But I've always been interested, and just putting it then using writing in VR is also it's just an exciting new form, and doesn't have a lot of rules yet, so it's quite fun to play with.
You mentioned you guys had funding for this project. What was the source of funding that you received?
Yeah, it was New Creatives North, which is a talent development programme funded by the BBC and Arts Council, and so that funded us to complete the film, and that was provided by Tyneside Cinema in Newcastle. I mean, we did all the work from home, obviously, but yeah, so that was the funding stream that funded it, and it was, I think, £18,000 for the full production budget for the film.
So my next question is a little bit more about influences. Before you were creating your first work, had you seen a lot of VR? So I'm going to start with you, Alyssa.
Not a terrible amount, I suppose. I did, when I was living in Munich, at the Munich Documentary Festival, there was a little like hut outside in the middle of nowhere that they kind of had some mostly 360 content. And I remember it had been ages ago I'd seen something, but I was impressed with what was in there. I'd seen, I think, especially again along the lines of science and nature, and if that's kind of what you're into, the Felix and Paul series, Nomads. It just looked so much better than I had expected the technology to have progressed. And so that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. And then coming to the UK and to NFTS, I saw more just by merit of hanging around in the game studio quite a lot. And that kind of entranced me a little bit. And the freedom someone has in looking around. I mean, as David and Anna said, that no one's really telling you where to look. Although you can kind of tell people where to look in certain ways. You can suggest it. They can always say no, which I think is fascinating, and I love that. Which, I mean, you can do in the cinema as well to some extent, but that kind of freedom to sculpt a space was really, really interesting. And so, as far as influences, yeah, some of the really amazing stuff that Felix and Paul did, especially along the documentary side, just because the images are so strong, and video games, I suppose. Some things can be quite fun. Yeah, I mean, some of my influences for my work in VR have actually been outside of VR as well. So just how do you, a lot of theatre, how do you construct a space, or dance. I used to do quite a lot of dance choreography. My first bachelor's actually was half in that. So that idea of conducting a movement as well, which is something I try to compose in my piece as well, is that not only what's going around the audience, but how does the audience feel when they're looking around? Where do you place things? So, you know, if there's a moment of kind of, I think there's a moment especially where you're in the story of a child, and so everything's a little bit up. So your actual posture when you're watching this piece, as you'd naturally look, as you're probably going to be shifted slightly up, and just what position does it put the audience member? What is their body position, or do they have to turn around or look over, you know, how much movement is involved, which is another just fun dimension that you get to put into these kind of pieces that you don't necessarily need to in others. And a lot of that came out of maybe my dance choreography and those kind of experiences. Yeah.
Great. Over to David and Anna.
Yeah, I think similarly, I don't know, I don't want to say ours, but I think we share quite a few influences. So I will. Yeah, I think a lot of our influences come from outside VR and outside theatre. Like, I think Olafur Ellefsson, the visual artist and installation artist, is a huge influence on our work. But also, yeah, theatre makers like Imitating the Dog and Forced Entertainment. And then also I was lucky enough to see quite a lot of VR before we made our first VR film.
Yeah, actually it was kind of, you were sort of spearheading the VR thing. I'm a bit more skeptical about new technologies and things, so you were like coming home from things and being like, you can see your hands and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that was like the thing that most amazed me about VR. Because I worked for a company called 59 Productions full-time for a year, and then as a freelancer then after that in a technical role. And they make some really great and amazing VR work, including something that was just at Venice Film Festival called Here. But the first time I put on a VR headset, I think I was just like ridiculously blown away by seeing my own hands. Like, there was a real sudden cognitive switch where my brain was convinced that this was it, this was the world. And so I think I was really excited, literally just by the technology at first, and then that it took like 3 years before we made something. But yeah, I did see quite a few films before we made our first one.
How important was it for you to collaborate together on this project? Because obviously you've got your own company, I Don't Love You Anymore.
Well, I mean, it kind of just is a bit natural of, you know, I have a writing idea and tell it to David, or he has a visual idea and tells it to me. It's just quite a natural, like, cognitive thing almost. That we work together on things. We do work separately from time to time, but it's just quite a nice, fun thing to be collaborating on things, and also actually very very necessary right now, because we were trapped in a house together for a long time, so we kind of needed to it was actually then became very convenient that we were working on this together, because if we weren't, we would have had to do long distance calls and stuff like that, which we did have to do with the rest of the team. But I think also, like, from my point of view,
so in terms of like the production, I don't know where I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I did a lot of the animation, and also got some help with the animation by a great animator called Joe Whitmore, but then did all of the kind of implementation and Unity development on the piece. And so it kind of built in this natural review cycle of Anna had, like, by that point finished the script and was recording with the actors and the performers in the piece. And then we got into this cycle of kind of like reviews, where I would finish a build and then Anna would watch it and have kind of like some separated feedback, because obviously I was like living inside the project, and it was, I mean, I think it improved the work immeasurably for you to be able to come in and go, I don't actually think it all needs to look like that, David. and to have someone who's not to have that kind of ability to have a bit of distance in different areas of the work.
And also because we come from slightly different angles and appreciate that we come from slightly different angles, so it being slightly more writerly in my head, like focusing on, I don't know, the rhythm of the way something sounds and stuff like that, and it being a bit more visual from yours, but us both being in a like directorial role, means that there's a lot of like interrogating that happens, and it's not just like one person's call on a thing. I think that's quite important.
I guess it added maybe rigor to the decisions.
I wanted now to move on to talking a lot more about the production side of things. So if I start with Eldfell, Alyssa, I know that you mentioned that you'd actually made a 360 film beforehand, and you could have been, using specialist cameras to make 360 rather than kind of 2D films. How easy for you was that transition from kind of moving from 2D cameras to 360 cameras to then kind of this next step to working in game engines such as Unity to create VR work?
I suppose I've always had a bit of a love for the technical things and technical gadgets. So because I'd done, when I studied in Prague, I'd studied cinematography, and then before I actually came to the UK, I was doing physics, all things, because I love physics. So I just kind of have pursued quite a few different curiosities that have kind of moved together. So it has definitely helped to have that basic knowledge of 2D cameras and how they work, and because a lot of those principles are the same, and I think they're just maybe compounded because there's so many more different lenses. And so knowing how a lens works, and knowing kind of even a little bit on the DFX side of things, of how the lens warps, and so my first film was monoscopic, so it only had it was flat, but Eldfell actually is stereoscopic, so for every image you actually have a left and the right eye offset. And I actually luckily for Eldfell, the stitcher was a little bit more kind, but for the first one I had to just go in and kind of stitch it manually and like do the math and kind of put all those things together, which is definitely more work than necessary. They'd have some great products out there that'll do it for you, but it was really helpful to really understand. And then that second step of kind of figuring out how to shoot with the 360 camera, and especially this kind of stereoscopic 360 camera, and find the right frame rate that wouldn't make you sick in VR, and then bringing it into the games engine was useful, because even then in the games engine there's some scenes where I've actually taken a still and I've kind of created, it's maybe too technical, but I've cut out different pieces of it, and I've kind of composited multiple 3D 360 images, and sometimes implemented, added extra 3D elements into it. So I'm just kind of live comping in 360, which that gets trickier, and it gets much easier if you kind of go through the different steps and you kind of know the theory of what you're trying to do and which eye you're accessing. Sometimes one eye is seeing something completely different than the other eye technically, but they don't know it in the scene itself. So that was all, I think, as building blocks. It was definitely a lot of work, and a lot of technical work, but I very much enjoyed it, and enjoyed kind of learning the coding and putting it all together. Had a lot of great help though. I had a lot of great people to come over and tell me why something wasn't working.
You mentioned earlier that you found it interesting that the audience have kind of a free to kind of look around the whole space. But when I watched Eldfell, what really intrigued me was your use of hands, actually, because it is interactive in that way. You absolutely invite the audience into to use their hands to kind of reach out and grab an interactive element. Can you talk a little bit about kind of why you made that decision to implement kind of this hand movements in there?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of it's a detail that's part of kind of a bigger philosophy, I guess, behind the work of why did I think this work needed to be in VR versus a traditional 2D or any other kind of medium, a photo essay. And I was thinking about what does VR do that maybe nothing else really does, and it can really put you into a different place. It can put you into a different time. You can time travel in it, or it can put you into like someone else's mind and someone else's shoes almost. Or it has the potential to. And those were kind of the three main things that I wanted to emphasize with this piece. Taking you into to an island in Iceland, is because I knew most of the people who'd be watching this would not be there. But then also, if you are familiar with that space, taking you actually back in time, because I took some video of the space itself and then actually kind of matched the footage with some archival footage, so you can kind of see the space transition into what it was before. And take you back in time that way, and then taking you into someone else's perspective. So through the interviews, because it is heavily interview based, and you hear people describing what they see. And there's one particular moment where she was actually kind of what you can see behind me here. She was a little girl leaving on the boats at 3 a.m. and she sees just the sight and the sound and the colors and the noise. And to her, it was musical almost. And, years later, it's still this huge impact. And she's written many songs about it. And that's kind of helps her express what it was. What is this kind of undescribable kind of thing? And so at that point in the film, you do have kind of, as she's described it, you have your freedom of your hand to kind of reach out and kind of almost touch the space as well, because there's particles. So it encourages you to reach out and kind of embody that experience as she might have felt it a little bit as she's speaking to it. So there's different points of that is really to kind of help you put yourself in the shoes of the people whose voices you are hearing.
And when it came to kind of constructing kind of the story of Eldfell, did you go on for example, a recce to Iceland first, and then once you shot the kind of a 360 footage, when you were back at NFTS, like how did you, was it a case of you looked at the archive footage first, or was it a case of you found a lot of kind of archive footage and these stories, and then you wanted to create the narrative after that? What was your process?
A little column B, I guess, with documentary, as it always is. Like, I did quite a lot of research. I knew what I wanted to tell in terms of the structure of how I could see people's stories of people and the land, and the relationship with the land and nature. And I knew a lot of the science of what they had actually done to technically, and the engineering feats that they had done to kind of save the town from the volcano and the volcanic eruption. And so I knew some things that I wanted. I knew the archival footage, but I wanted to see if I could match cut beforehand. I didn't have a chance for a recce, so a lot of it was fly by wire, unfortunately. And especially in Iceland, if you ever want to produce in Iceland, like amazing, kind people, but especially where I was a bit out of the way, and most of them were like, oh yeah, no, like just give us a call when you land. So I was on the phone all the time. I was like, hey, do you want to give me an interview? And then they're like, oh, you should talk to my brother. And like the next day, they'd give me that. So a lot of it was really quite an adventure to get all that footage. And I don't speak Icelandic, so of course I had to get usually we'd talk about what they were going to say, but then what was actually in the footage I had to translate afterwards and go through, kind of after I gotten all my footage, go through all the footage and then you rewrite the story, because of course it's the story of the people and what they actually said and how they actually felt about something, and then you kind of rebuild that and bring it together to kind of make a cohesive piece and an accurate representation, I think, of what they wanted to say.
Thanks. So Anna and David, could you talk a little bit about your starting point for To Miss the Ending?
Well, as a starting point, it was quite a good firm starting point because it was already a play. So we made it with a group called Theatre 42 in 2016. So some of that work of scripting was sort of already there, but then we obviously had some elements that needed changing for it to be in VR, and just rewriting that, redrafting that a little bit, and also keeping up with the timeline of things because it was a like imagined future. And like I said earlier, some of the things had already slightly happened. The future, you imagine a future and it kind of catches up with you. So yeah, we kind of had to like rewrite a few things and make it more relevant for today, or make it more futuristic today. So stuff like, you know, the first crash of a self-driving car has sort of already happened, and like automation is a big worry now, as like already, and things like that. So that was already a thing. And then we also slightly updated it to be making it in a pandemic as well. So we also put like a couple of lines in there that reference that, and also we had to like send recording devices to actors and things like that, and do those via Zoom, and give direction via Zoom and stuff like that. Yeah, and we kind of went about the process of taking this script, redrafting some things, and like storyboarding what it would look like in VR. I remember like meeting in a coffee shop and going through that.
Yeah, and then also just like a lot of conceptual discussions about like about setting ourselves like limits and restraints. So for instance, in the theatrical version, there's a clear limit on how big of a structure you can build. It's like how high is the building, or how
tall are you?
Yeah, how tall are the performers? Whereas in VR, all those limits go away. So you have to recreate artificial limits for you for yourself. Or we felt like we needed to recreate artificial limits for ourselves to stop the visual just spiraling and kind of losing the original feeling of the source material,
and making rules of the world as well. So like, you know, what do these things sound like when they touch the ground, and what is the ground? Because you're completely building a world from scratch. And what are the physics of these things, and when they bump into each other, what happens, and how do they hold themselves up, and things like that. So
there was a load of conceptual talk about that, and then then we moved on to making some pre-visualizations in so this really boring technical the workflow of the project was Cinema 4D into Substance, which is a painting tool, and then into Unity. So we made some pre-visualizations just in Cinema, not in Unity, just so that we could decide on the kind of look that we would be aiming for, and then we started building then, I think, basically. Then we got into production, because like Anna said as well, we were sort of slightly pressed for time, of like, it was 6 months and suddenly we couldn't meet anyone in person. So so we just had to sort of get started straight away.
And we were lucky to have such a good team. We had a great team of actors working with us, and we had some brilliant sound designers. Actually, the sound design is really, really cool in it.
By Jamie Finley of We Make Audio, and a great executive producer in Dan Tucker, and a great producer in Steph Clark. So the whole team obviously made the thing happen. In difficult circumstances.
So for those who haven't seen the piece, you don't actually to miss the ending, you don't see any kind of physical representations of people, and I'm presuming in the theatre piece you do see people.
So in the theatre piece, things are needing to be built. So in the theatre piece, the actors present, or the performers present as the people who have uploaded to this machine, and they're kind of they're sort of playing consciousnesses. So they're playing thousands of memories that have been uploaded. So they're not really one character or anything like that. And they're building these structures as they go, and as the structures are built out of cardboard boxes, they're projection mapped in block color to look like pixels. And I guess we hit that
question of like, are there people in it, and how do we navigate the existence of the voices? And we did like a bit of experimenting basically, and so we tried adding kind of particle-ish, kind of effervescent, like just non-corporeal like versions of people that would move around, and then we tried adding like kind of just these kind of floating atmospheric things that would react to the voice and kind of position the voices a bit more. But I think
because actually in the story, the beauty of VR is that you can feel like a person in this space, but you're very aware that you're not. So kind of that sort of worked to our advantage, because that's what the space was that we were representing, which is why we were also like flirting with the idea to begin with of putting this in VR, because actually the people, the body of the people don't need to be there anyway.
And the embodiment of those voices kind of recedes anyway in the text, because it's so about the location they're speaking about. So yeah, I think in the end we decided, well, it's not better. It's not better to give these voices form. It makes more sense for them to be completely disembodied, because also you're completely disembodied in the piece. So there's a difficult logic there of why would you be in this situation and not be able to see yourself, but you can see other people. And so I think at the end of the day, we decided to keep the logic of the world kind of clean, and to just allow the pixels and the location to take kind of visual precedence over the people's bodies, I guess.
So my next question is, what do you think has been the biggest learning curve for this project? So I'll start with you, Alyssa.
That would probably be the games engine. I guess how to create a VR game or a VR interactive experience. Because prior to this, I had some coding experience. I did a little bit of Python with physics. So I knew the basics of how to maybe write code. I knew cameras pretty well, even though that was a bit of a curve as well. But definitely the game, learning how to make a games or an interactive experience in a game engine was probably the biggest one, just because there's so many different things to cover. There's so many even basic fundamentals of how do you texture an object and all of that. Everything there. And I was kind of approaching it for the first time, really. I definitely been hanging around and learning a lot of stuff and picking up bits here and there, but I hadn't really ever made a piece yet. So this was my first Unity project, and I think it holds up pretty well. Don't look at the scene hierarchy; it's horrible. But I'd say that was definitely it. It's not impossible to do, and I definitely had some amazing help with everyone in the Games Lab and the Immersive Games Lab at NFTS, and so I knew I had the support structure to be able to do this, but I didn't know it was going to be the biggest learning curve. But it has been really rewarding, and once you do that first jump, I think you pick up quite a lot of other things. So now I'm much more familiar with that.
I would say it holds up very well. So same question to Anna and David.
I mean, quite honestly, it's probably just the fact that we were hit by this pandemic in the middle of making this. Probably the biggest learning curve has just been dealing with that and how to get around those boundaries that we didn't expect to happen.
Crisis management. Maybe.
Crisis management. Having to navigate these long distance things and having to keep teamwork going and keep the motivation going for it in this time. That's been my biggest learning curve, I think.
I think also there was a giant learning curve about so the piece originally was intended to be like a location-based experience, and to move it into a completely like screen-based product, which is what it will be now until we can show it in a kind of physical install again. I guess there was a lot of learning there about kind of contextualizing it and making it feel, recreating maybe the things we would have done in the real world to put you in the mindset and in the place to suspend your disbelief about what we were about to kind of suggest to you, creating that only once you've actually put on the headset and you're inside the digital. I guess that was like, again, a subsection maybe of crisis management, but yeah, that was like a real learning curve for me anyway. Yeah.
Great. So I was going to ask next, so with the kind of technologies that exist at the moment and working in VR, like where do you see kind of your work taking next? Do you think that your next piece will be in VR, or is there any other kind of new technologies that you want to kind of experiment with and learn more about?
Me?
Yeah, Alyssa.
Oh, lots. There's so many new technologies I really love to experiment. I mean, that's the thing that drives me quite a lot, just personally, is looking at learning new things and learning the new tech. I definitely want to do more in XR and location-based things, which might be off for a few, I don't know, months to years. So that's not the first thing I'll be seeking. But games as well, some just pure game projects, because of what I'm really curious there is just the audience it can reach, and for especially some really important things to communicate about science or about, you know, environmentalism, or these stories, or just that kind of education, or resources, or those kind of stories. Just pure video games has a reach and a scope that a lot of maybe more fun and experimental art forms don't really have, and so that does interest me as well. There's all sorts of things. I suppose I've got my keyboard currently hooked up to my games engine, so trying to create music theory, or music as an input almost, and what you do with that in terms of a piece. So there's tons of new things and tons of new tech. That's I find very, very interesting, I suppose.
And David and Anna?
We have a few things that we are looking at making in the next couple of years. We're gonna experiment more with VR. we're gonna stick around in VR for a bit. I think there's still like a lot of unexplored avenues in VR. That's the kind of exciting thing about it for me, is that there's kind of no rules at the minute, because it's such a new thing. I mean, a few people will try and say give you some rules, but they're kind of there to be questioned, and that's what's quite exciting, is that it's sort of such a new platform that it's sort of there for the taking, and like you can go into it and create your own path, and create your own rules in it. I think that's what's kind of cool. So I think we definitely want to keep making some things for VR. We have like a few ideas in the trunk, don't we?
Yeah, and then we're also working on a project with wearables, and kind of getting people's like data, so like vital data, and using that in like a physical installation. That's the next project that we're kind of talking to people about, and that would have a like, I suppose, participatory, in that people would be wearing like Internet of Things wearables to send data back, but also a physical element in the real world, and then an AR element on top of that to give context to those physical objects that are influenced by people distant from them. So that's the project we're working on right now.
We're in a sort of bit of a scary world filled with like our data and things like that. So I mean, kind of for artists, there's something to grab at there, as well as the horrible corporations. There's something for artists in that, I think, as well.
And particularly with like health data, like that's such a prescient thing at the minute, of people being aware of their own, vital signs, maybe in a way that we weren't 12 months ago, or that, obviously lots of people are, but that maybe the vast majority of people weren't quite as fixated on. So yeah, I think we'd like to tell a story using like blood oxygen levels and heart rate data and blood pressure and things like that. I think we think that would be quite interesting and moving, hopefully.
And would you always use kind of live actors in your work, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's kind of tricky at the moment to do that, and so I suppose we're like slightly adapting to that. But we are interested in, you know, the more installation-based things as well. So we're kind of I suppose we mix and match between.
I think our work will always be people-focused, though.
Yeah.
Like I don't think, for instance, we would maybe make an installation or a piece of VR that was completely abstract or was completely lacking a kind of like human element. But yeah, like Anna said, I think, I don't know if that necessarily means there would always be actors in it. It might mean that, you know, you're in it as the audience or participant in the work.
Great. I can see that we've had quite a few audience questions. If you do have a question, please do put that into the Q&A box. But I am going to start with a few audience questions now. So, okay, so I'm going to start from the top. I'm assuming this is the person who got there first. So this is from Jojo Bossman, and it is a question to all of the panelists. Do you have any advice on how to make interactive films for storytellers who don't have the specialist equipment to do so? Any takers, and who wants to go first?
I mean, so I suppose just on a purely like technical level, I think like if we say like you've got a laptop maybe as like a basis for equipment, you can from that point get almost all the way except for needing a headset to making something. So Blender is free, Unity is free to use on the free license, and then I guess you do hit a bit of a wall where maybe you need a headset then at the end of that. Well,
also there's like, I mean, if you have a great idea, you know, write it down write it down as a storyboard or write it down as a script or whatever, and you can approach people. You know, people will be more than happy to work with you. Maybe like seek people out who do have that equipment and work with them. There's also like little groups that you can find online. There's like in Manchester, there's VR Manchester, and there's always people willing to sort of lend equipment here and there. So you will find stuff, I think, if you ask about, but it's just about asking people for that. But I mean, kind of like you're doing now, but yeah, like asking people for that advice and writing stuff down when you have a good thought.
Yeah, I was also just going to like finish that topic with, you know, if you're making 3 degrees of freedom stuff, so stuff that doesn't need an actual headset, then a Google Cardboard and a mobile phone will work as a viewing device for like a pure 360 film. So I guess obviously those still include pieces of equipment, but I think it's, you know, you don't have to immediately shoot for needing a gaming PC and a full Vive setup and you know, a lot of expensive equipment. I think even if you're trying to borrow things that are maybe lower down the pecking order in terms of specialty, I think that maybe is an achievable way to get into it if you can't find the source for the more specialized, more expensive kit. Yeah.
Alyssa, any advice? What would you do with someone who doesn't have any kit at home? How would they get started?
Well, seconded everything that they said. David and Anna said that's quite good advice, and like they pointed out, a lot of the kind of the heavy lifters of the games engines and Blender and those kind of things are free to a certain extent. So as long as you have kind of a laptop, you can start to get into that, and that will get you pretty far. So even if there might be some ideas that you can't really achieve yet, you can maybe build the basis of, or the prototype of, and seek out equipment. I mean, even for my film in Iceland, like I had to bring a camera. There was not a camera to film there, so I had to bring it from the UK, and there's only 2 of those in here. So there's you hit those kind of levels at all, despite whatever your funding might be. But and there's tons of other people in that boat. So if you do seek out those communities as well that are just kind of making it for themselves, or hacking together a phone, especially if you get a smartphone with a certain amount of things in it, you can create some really interesting stuff. So AR apps, you could probably build those out. So that's a different way of creating an immersive experience. VR headset, yeah, you do kind of hit at some point, you will need one of those to properly kind of view it, although you can build quite a bit. But you might also be able to do maybe just a first person experience, like a first person gaming experience, first person interactive experience, which also the flip side of that is that you're making work that's potentially more accessible to a greater amount of people, so that you're not limiting your viewership by who else has the VR headset to view it, because there's quite a lot of other people who don't have that kind of access either. And so if you want your work to really get out there, if you have a story that's really important to tell, I say don't shy away from maybe making something that is WSAD on a keyboard and something on your desktop screen. You can still make different kind of artistic work, even if it looks like it's playing like a video game. So there's lots of stuff out there, and there's lots of tricks as well that people are doing in tutorials. There's an amazing amount of groups. So yeah, I guess that's my best advice.
Just off what the back of Alyssa said as well, there's also, if you're trying to just craft interactive narratives, there's tools like Twine, which is an interactive storytelling app, and there's a language called Inkle, which you can get off GitHub, and both of those are free to use. I think Twine's still free to use, and so those will just let you write interactive stories that then you can export and kind of by clicking on options move through different pathways of storytelling. So just in terms of actually writing them and experiencing them on paper, I suppose, that maybe those tools are a good place to start as a writer.
Great, right. So we've got another question. This one is from Georgia Istrate, and this is to everyone on the panel. How would you go about deciding if your story or film will be suited for a different format, such as VR? And at what point in the story writing process is it a good time to consider this?
Maybe I'll start. So, I mentioned a little bit about why I chose VR for this project. And it almost went hand in hand, because I knew I wanted to do a VR work, and I knew I wanted to involve 360 film, and I was looking for kind of something that one of my different ideas that fit into it. And I think it's useful to look at the medium and what can it do? And kind of working from the technical side and the visualization side is also kind of very helpful. So for me, it was important to kind of transport you into another place, another mind, another perspective, and VR had the potential to do that, and I think in an interesting way. And so that was from the kind of concept and early development that was built into it, and was built into kind of the way I wanted to approach the storytelling. Yeah, I'd say it's never too early to consider what suits best. I've definitely had ideas that are not suited for VR. And I want to make, maybe as a traditional 2D documentary, or even as a photo series or a sculpture, or some things that are definitely just a musical composition. And because I think the things that have always worked best, almost regardless of what art form it ends up taking, is the thing that really needs to be in that art form, or takes something really creative and interesting out of that and makes use of it, plays to its strengths, or rips down its weaknesses in an interesting way. I'm sure David and Anna, working from theatre and across all sorts of different medias, you guys probably have quite a lot of experience with that as well.
I think just happens in the kind of the idea of it, or the narrative of it, where you go, this can't be in any other form. I think, like you said, Alyssa, it's like that thing of this just needs to be told in this way. Obviously VR is a thing that's so immersive, so putting the viewer in a space, that I guess if you have a story to tell that needs the viewer to be dropped right in a scene, that needs to be right there and everything happening around them, if it can only be told like that, then clearly VR's the way to go. But yeah, it should sort of shout its form at you.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add. I think you both said like everything I was thinking.
Right. Right. So we definitely have more questions. The next one I'll take is from Arjun, and this is to all of you guys. Do you think that interactive media will become as popular and widespread as traditional media? And if so, what advancements within interactive media are you looking forward to or hope will be possible in the future? That's a great question. What does the future hold?
I mean, it is. If you consider video games, it is. If it is bigger than the film industry, it's bigger than the theater industry, it's bigger than a lot of other things. So I think if you're looking at just interactive storytelling, and there's different degrees if you look to the video game world about how much of it is storytelling or purely mechanics driven, whatever. But there's a huge amount of work that's already out there that is huge. So I think it definitely has proven that there's an appetite for that kind of personal engagement between the audience and the work itself, and that kind of interactive engagement, that kind of immersive engagement, whatever those terms mean, because I think they can cover quite a lot of different things. So I definitely think it's going to be big. I think it is big in a lot of ways already. And I'm really fascinated to see how it does kind of start to combine with the film industries and with the theatre industries and all these other things, because it's fascinating. There's a lot I've been doing recently as well in virtual production, which is bringing gaming technologies into the film world and the TV world, and changing the way that kind of production process is being done, and what else you can kind of do, what kind of avenues it opens up for different kind of storytelling in those kind of mediums. So yes, in short.
I think as well, there are already like big movements for interactive and immersive work in just sort of regular theatre. There's great companies like Darkfield and Blast Theory making work like in a really immersive way, and are very successful at doing it. And yeah, there's still things that in particular VR can't quite do, in terms of like really like giving us the real. It can't do. So like, if you wanted to place someone in a beautiful meadow, VR can never quite match up for that. So I guess that would be a thing that I was like hoping would get better in future. I'm sure it will eventually, although nothing quite matches the human eye, does it? So maybe that will always be a bit of a problem. But
yeah, I think I sort of think I agree that I think it is already a giant, like interactive storytelling is already giant, like Alyssa said, and I think VR in particular as a sub genre of that, I think is probably going to grow. And I suppose the thing I'm excited for is the reduction in price and the reduction in the barrier for entry into the medium, because I think that will always lead to more people making it, but also more people consuming stuff in that way, whether it's game or narrative-based storytelling or kind of technical or enterprise uses, and all of those things are kind of, particularly in enterprise and in production, that they're already like definitely happening and there to stay. I think as a consumer focused thing for consuming media, I think the reduction in cost probably is what's going to drive that, both in terms of people making it and people using it as a viewing platform. And
it's actually already things are happening in terms of its use in medical science and things like that, of its use in training surgeons, and there's just quite exciting things happen with it being a tool. I'm kind of interested in, like, as well, how we make it a tool for care and things like that. I've been saying to David recently, it'd be really interesting to take certain things into care homes and, you know, introduce environments to people who maybe can't leave or feel a bit trapped in their bodies. I feel like it could be quite a cool tool for care.
And then just purely technically, I think there's loads of places like that it could go that just would be cool and exciting. So like eye tracking, or like better haptics and better hand tracking, so you maybe don't need controllers. Like increasing the frame rates so that like nausea is less of a problem. Like I think there's loads and loads of like purely technical things which I think are just going to keep getting better. Like if you look at the progress of smartphones over the past 5 years and apply that to VR headsets, then yeah, like I think the VR headsets we'll be wearing in 10 years time will be very different from the ones we've got at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely more technology to come. Staying with audiences, there's a question here from Eddie Mauld, and this, I'm going to say this is a quote. VR sits between film and theatre, quote. And then the question is, do you think VR works will ever reach a mass audience and appeal? And do you think this will happen in terms of exhibition? And how do you think this will happen in terms of exhibition? So audiences, and how do you take it to audiences, and can physical exhibitions ever happen again in the COVID world we live in?
So I think like VR as a collective or like mass experience, similar to going to the theatre or going to the cinema, I think there's a few things that hold that back at the minute. One is that it is inherently a very solo experience. So when you put a headset on, you feel very separated from the world. And I think there's lots of things you can do. And in the location-based experience of To Miss the Ending, the idea is that at the end, when you take your headset off, you are greeted by other people in the room who you
who are all taking their headsets off, and you realise you've all just experienced the same thing. Yeah. And the room will be like rearranged, so it will be slightly different to how you entered it.
Yeah. So I think there's lots of stuff in terms of just like theatricalizing the production of VR as a location-based experience that can do that. And I think that, yeah, I think, again, it comes down to technology. Like, so.
And the price of technology, because with that reveal that we've only envisioned it with like 5 or 6 audience members. And that's purely because of the top end of our budget. But as the budget increases, or as the price of the thing fell, we could probably get more and more and more people.
And it will be also about investment from buildings and institutions in that technology as a thing that they would like to exhibit. So, 10 years ago, and still now to a large degree, it was really hard to get video in theatre. Like, no, theatres just didn't own projectors or video servers, and now lots of them do. At least the larger houses definitely do, or most places are very expecting to have to rent video equipment to put in a theatrical production, and I think it'll be the same thing of as people invest in and believe in the medium, it becomes easier to do it to larger audiences, and it becomes easier for artists to decide to make something for that medium because they know that there's the infrastructure out there to show it to people. So yeah, I guess that's the road that I see it taking. Is it being a kind of maybe an experience driven thing that has a lot of stuff around it. But I don't know. I'm sure there's also a completely different direction that it might go in. We might be very wrong.
Right, so the next question we have is from Daniel K, and it is, what was your experience writing and developing your VR experience, and how did this differ on a creative process level from your work in documentary, theatre, and film?
I guess you're composing for a different medium, and I think maybe the biggest difference is there's a lot more variables, I guess, that you're working with. And so I approached the work, because a lot of what I've done in my degree work and over the last few years has been more just either straight documentary for 2D or some, cinematography for 2D filmmaking, which has plenty of different ways and inputs anyway that you're creating for, and you have to take into account. But then I think for VR especially, you have all those extra things, some of that I mentioned before. So of course you have sound, but you also have what direction is it coming from. You have the actual movement of the position of your audience member. You not only is it, of course, 360, whichever way, if you choose to have a spinning or a moving experience. So you have so many other, avenues for creativity that you have to address besides the visual and the audio, and not only in maybe one dimension, but so many other dimensions, which I found really exciting. Like I mentioned before, it means that I get to not only be, a film director, but I also get to be kind of a director for sound and kind of, I guess, theater, or building up space, or building up sculpture, or building up a world, and then also building up kind of movement and kind of choreography and tracing that out. And so it really, that was maybe my creative process, is if I got to approach it from almost all these different genres and of art forms, and kind of stretch all those different kind of muscles, which is why it's so fascinating to me, I think. Yeah.
I suppose when you're writing anything, there's a question of why is this being presented in this way, and why is the audience here like this? So if you're writing theatre, it's why am I on stage and why are they there, and why is it important that the story is told like this? What interaction does that mean we have? And there's interaction with the audience in anything. Doesn't matter if it's an interactive or an immersive work. There's always interaction with the art and the audience. So I guess that you start writing with that question in mind. And when it comes to writing VR, it's a very, the limits differ, and the reason as to why the audience member is there is different. So in VR, it's also, why are they here? Why have you put them in this environment? And what does it mean? How are they interacting with this work? That question, you need to find the answer to that question.
Yeah, and also, like, for when you're making, I don't know about, at least when you're making a piece of theatre, there's kind of like two levels of visual that you're playing with. You're playing with the external visual, so like what the audience is seeing, and then there's also an internal plane of visual of like what images are you conjuring in people's minds as they're listening to what's being said or watching what's happening. And so in VR, those two things are a little bit harder to deal with, because it's so much harder to leave space or to allow an internal visual for someone in VR, because VR feels so there and so kind of encompassing, that either you have to really intentionally leave space for people to imagine, or you have to show people a bit more, so that there's maybe less demand on the person experiencing the work to create an internal visualization. So yeah, I think you have to play with those boundaries and where the vision sits a bit more in VR than you do. Well, not you have to play more, but just like the levels are different. Like if you're adjusting for sound volume, the levels are different.
That was our final question for tonight. We are out of time. But I think on behalf of everyone for the BFI Film Academy and all our audiences watching at home, to say a huge thank you to David, Anna and Alyssa. Your experiences, Eldfell and To Miss the Ending, are very much part of the LFF Expanded exhibition. If you do have a VR headset at home, please do check it out. There are still slots available at BFI South Bank for the exhibition. And just my note is just to wrap up to say that for the LFF, that the expanding session is new this year, but it's definitely here to stay. So in the future, I very much hope to see some BFI Film Academy creators, making VR works in whatever technology that will exist in the future. Right. Thanks, David. Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Alyssa. And thank you to BFI Academy and Alex as well on the team.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and thank you, our panelists. You were all great. It was such a brilliant discussion. Just before you all leave, I wanted to let you know that we've put together a short survey that we would really, really appreciate if you could complete. I think Noel will post the link to it in the chat box shortly, but also you'll get an email from Eventbrite after this event with the link. If you could take a few minutes and tell us what you enjoyed about today and what we can improve for the future for our events, that would be great. And just to let you know, we have one more event coming up as part of the Film Academy Day at the BFI London Film Festival. That's Hotspot with Jennifer Sheridan at 8 p.m. tonight. So that's open to all our Film Academy delegates. Jen is an award-winning director and filmmaker. She has her debut feature in the festival this year called Rose: A Love Story, a horror. And also some of you may know Jen because she was joined the Future Film Festival back in February and spoke to you guys about breaking into the UK film industry. So don't miss it. You can still register for it. Check your emails from us, and the registration link and the password for it will be in your emails. So see you at 8 p.m. Thank you so much, Elaine, Anna, David, and Alyssa. Have a good night.